Hey, Julie and Lawrence, Western Plant Explorers. We're on the slopes of Mount Hood in Northwest Oregon to find a very special plant, the small but mighty Pacific yew. The grove of yew which I knew and hoped to film was overrun by wildfire last fall, and the area remains closed to the public. Pacific yew has thin bark, and they rarely survive direct flames. I'm hopeful that the patchy nature of wildfire spared them. So we're off to a different area, closer to Mount Hood, in hopes of finding a grove at least as numerous as the one I knew. Their shrubby habit and unusual reproductive strategy, at least unusual for a conifer, means that you never find a forest of yew. Large areas of forests may only have scattered individuals, while in others, groves can be found forming dense thickets. And it looks like we've found some. Okay, so we've walked into the forest and now we have a grove of Pacific yew as the understory, amongst of course many other things in the understory here. But this is fantastic. I'm looking forward to checking out all of these trees. Though it's sometimes found as a tree, Pacific yew is normally found as tall shrubs. They can be easy to distinguish by this shape and their color, which is more olive green than any of the conifers that grow among them. Though its foliage is very similar to coast redwood, it's hard to mistake that giant species for a little yew. Pacific Northwest conifers are noted for being huge trees. They're 200 feet tall, they're 5 feet around, but a Pacific yew, that's a whole different story. It grows in the understory, down in the dark patches. It's often a scraggly, somewhat ugly tree. It usually is much more of a really large bush, but whatever it is not what you normally think of a Pacific Northwest conifer. This is a typical Northwest conifer, an old-growth Douglas fir. There are many of these trees scattered around this area, and I had to check them out. To identify Pacific yew when you have the foliage, look for needles held out horizontally. They're very soft, but they have a point on the tip. Also notice the twig remains green all the way, except for when you get back farther into their growth. If you compare this to a grand fir, you can see that it has needles held out horizontally, but the twig remains brown. Also, tip these over, a distinct difference between the grand fir and the yew. Okay. So this is the bark of Pacific yew. It's that reddish purple color. It's beautiful. It's easy to distinguish from other species of yew with this bark. In the sunlight, in the rain, it looks just marvelous. Now this is the bark from which Taxol was derived. Taxol was a cancer drug used in the 90s. It was very effective, but it required the stripping of the bark of numerous trees throughout the Pacific Northwest. Thankfully, Taxol has been synthesized and the trees no longer need to lose their bark. I love all the cool species in a forest, but what I especially love? The quiet. Silver fir. An important thing to know about Pacific yew is that they are extremely poisonous. Everything on this plant, leaves, needles, twigs, bark, roots, wood, is poisonous. The seeds are poisonous. In fact, the only thing that isn't poisonous is the flesh of the little red aril that forms around the seed. So many of the toxic plants that grow in Pacific Northwest forests actually have alkaloids in them, toxic alkaloids. Those are usually flowers. They're wildflowers or other plants around the forest floor. Conifers are not known for having those at all, but they are in fact what makes Pacific yew poisonous. Deer have evolved to digest the poisons that are in yew, which is why they are able to eat it, and many of the plants you see around us have been munched on by deer. So Pacific yew has pollen cones and seed cones on separate plants. Here we have a plant with pollen cones. So as you see, these are not the berries or arils that you normally see on yews, say in your landscaping. This is a pollen cone set. Each one of those is an individual cone. There's pollen sacs in there, and as this comes time, those sacs grow and burst and release the pollen into the wind. The seed cone is much different. At this time of year, spring, the seed cone is tiny, but you can see the scales like many other conifers have in their seed cones. This is what a fully mature seed cone looks like. To science, this is an aril, not a berry, which is the fruit of a flowering plant. A majority of conifer species rely on the wind to disperse their seeds, and if they're a tall canopy tree, that makes sense. But the yew family, called Taxaceae, is one of a few conifer families that has evolved for animals to spread the seeds to new areas. The bright red aril attracts animals to eat it, and as their digestive system is not strong enough to digest the seed coat, they are not poisoned, but they deposit the seed somewhere else with a dollop of fertilizer. The meadows in this area are beautiful. Natural meadows in the Cascade Mountains show how soils define the plants which grow in the area. Some soils are too dry for trees, and others, like this one, are too wet for trees. The plants in this meadow are primarily sedges, and the trees which grow too close during dry years are swamped and die during wet years. The plants which grow here define the insects, birds, and other animals that use this area. So you have geology defining the parameters of the ecology here, as it does everywhere. Volcanoes erupted, raising the land to this elevation. The volcanoes deposited the material that became the waterlogged soil. The soil defines the plants, and the plants define the animals that reside here. In a sense, the volcanic eruptions that happened millions of years ago led to our enjoying this beautiful meadow today. We hope you've enjoyed learning about the Pacific yew with us. If you want to nerd out with us about more plants in the future, feel free to like or subscribe. You can also check us out on Instagram, Western Plant Explorers. My name's Julian Lawrence. Thanks for watching. To identify Pacific yew when you have the foliage, look for needles. Yeah. No, I did get the damn bug out of my ear. I'll cut that and... Okay, so this is the bark of Pacific yew. Son of a bitch. Deer, however, have evolved to... Oh God, I totally kneeled in that deer shit.
Oh no, oh dear.
Awesome. Oh, well, we're gonna wash these pants.
Good?
Yeah.